Okay, so by this point we have read Mary Shelley's Frankenstein from 1818 and watched Wales' 1931 adaptation of the novel. And now we're on to Frankenstein MD, which is Pemberley Digital's remediation of Shelley's novel. Now, Frankenstein is perhaps the only romantic novel to rival Jane Austen's in frequency of adaptation. But Pemberley Digital's remediation of Shelley's novel is significant for the ways in which it reimagines the gender politics of the text and positions itself within the tradition of mainstream film adaptations of the original novel. So as an adaptation of adaptations of Shelley's text, the series incorporates some of the innovations of earlier film versions and includes inside jokes about departures from Shelley's novel, most notably the erroneous tradition of referring to the character as Frankenstein. So in this video, I want to draw your attention to how Frankenstein MD's engagement with both Shelley's Frankenstein and the Frankenstein tradition through conversations around science, gender, and illusion, that is, allusions to other texts, is a way to understand its place within the Frankenstein tradition and also within the larger context of transmedia storytelling. By modernizing the setting and framing the adaptation as an educational science series instead of a novel-to-film adaptation, Frankenstein MD highlights present-day gender dynamics in the sciences. So, Frankenstein MD might seem to reverse course for Pemberley Digital's approach to both the funding and distribution of their first 3 transmedia adaptations on multiple platforms. And we have read in Digital Storytelling about how the finances of transmedia storytelling has impacted how transmedia storytelling is distributed. So I do want you to make sure you refer back to that. Now, Pemberley Digital's earlier adaptations they garnered national attention for the success of their Kickstarter campaigns and innovative use of social media. Now, Frankenstein MD, on the other hand, there we go. So Frankenstein MD, on the other hand, was funded by the venerable PBS, albeit in the new offshoot PBS Digital Studios, and aired on PBS Digital Studios' YouTube channel, and scaled back on the social media presence of the protagonists. While the main characters do occasionally take to Twitter, the majority of the story appears on PBS Digital's web series. An early review in the AV Club notes, and I'm quoting here, "We can approach web series Frankenstein MD from 2 directions. The first is to consider as the latest literary adaptation from Pemberley Digital, which has made its name developing web series based on the work of Jane Austen. The second is to consider as the latest effort from PBS to engage with audiences consuming content in a digital space. Whereas previously Pemberley Digital series have been framed as video diaries, Frankenstein MD is constructed as a science series with the added benefit of an ongoing narrative to expand audience engagement. The mashup of these 2 points of view is the most exciting part of Frankenstein MD, which offers both a meaningful expansion of the Pemberley Digital model and an intriguing new path for PBS as a public broadcaster, or public webcaster in this case." That's the end of the quote. So this mashup of Pemberley Digital's approach to transmedia adaptations of 19th century novels by women, as well as PBS's tradition of educational programming in the sciences, foregrounds the questions of gender and power that marks other of Pemberley Digital's increasing prominence in mainstream media. And that's something that we're going to be talking about, is the way that transmedia storytelling has impacted mainstream media. So while the general format of Frankenstein MD remains similar to earlier Pemberley Digital productions, the limited use of social media focuses attention on the web series and the protagonist Victoria's blog. These blog entries, though tied to the plot, often provide historical context for the science featured in each episode. So you can see that the links to Victoria's blog are located right beneath the videos. And here is the first post that was put up on August 4th, 2014. And you can see how, as we go backwards, as blogs do, we're going forward in time. along with, so this is August 14th, 2014, and the blog entries coincide then with the episodes, and we keep going into the future as we go back into the past to look at this. So these blog entries are supposed to be ancillary to the web series itself. Now, by limiting the series to 24 episodes, each runs for less than 10 minutes, Pemberley Digital broadened the potential audience base. The web series science premise also made a logical choice for the partnership with PBS. Indeed, Joe Hansen, host of PBS science series It's Okay to Be Smart, served as the science advisor for the web series. Thus, FMD expands Pemberley Digital's model into the realm of educational programming. So while the web series modernizes yet transcribes the major plot points and character relationships of Shelley's novel, it also simultaneously seems to invert every binary posed by Shelley's original. For example, Shelley's novel suppresses the creation scene and much of the scientific context for Victor Frankenstein's work, yet Frankenstein MD's premise is that Frankenstein and her medical school friend Iggy DeLacy are filming this web series to popularize science. And here you can see Iggy, and here is Victoria. So, of course, it's hard to miss the absence of women in the domestic in Shelley's novel, and Frankenstein MD reverses the gender of most of the principal characters. Victor Frankenstein, not Victor. Victoria Frankenstein, not Victor. Eli Lavenza, not Elizabeth. Rory Clerval, not Henry. So while this change seems to reflect the entry of women into the scientific workforce, more recent efforts to recruit women to STEM fields and the advances of feminism in the nearly 200 years between Shelley's novel and Pemberley Digital's web series, it does complicate the gender politics of the text. And we need to think about things that are technologies, in addition to just things that are synthetically created by man, objects, but also cultural ideas. So cultural ideas of what is man, what is woman. That is also a technology that can be wielded and changes the scale, pace, and pattern of our lives. So keep that in mind. Of course, any adaptation of a 19th century text must grapple with the historical divide between the original text and the present day, as well as the formal challenges posed in remediating an alphabetic text as a transmedia series. These issues are compounded by Frankenstein's attention to emerging science. If Victor pursued nature into her hiding places in the novel and seeks to circumvent both nature and women by creating life himself, Victoria's narrative arc essentially eliminates the role of nature altogether. The series is filmed entirely indoors and primarily in the lab, as you can see here, and the shallow focus keeps our attention on Victoria, but nevertheless we can see all of the chemicals in the background and scientific equipment. Victoria's quest is not to triumph over nature, but rather over her male scientist peers. Thus, her hubris is not in exceeding the limits prescribed by nature, but the limits prescribed by her male colleagues. Similarly, if Victor sought to usurp the maternal in creating a creature, Victoria is ultimately returned to the maternal. The series concludes with her and her creature alone together in the dim, subterranean, womb-like enclosure of her parents' basement. Given the constraints of the source text, Victoria's feminist drive to succeed in male-dominated fields is punished by returning her to both the domestic and reproductive realms. This series is not a period adaptation, obviously, as you can see here. Frankenstein MD is set in the present and uses 21st century technology, both in terms of the science on which Frankenstein relies to create the creature and in the very medium of the story. It is a transmedia narrative. The use of multiple platforms has the potential to offer something like the digital equivalent of Shelley's frame narrative, in which the primacy of Frankenstein's story is challenged by multiple narrators providing parallel or competing histories within the novel, as you remember. So thus, while readings of the novel have attended to the ways our interpretation shifts if we trust one narrative more than the other, the creatures over Victor's, for example, or if we consider the likelihood of Walton's sympathy for Victor biasing his narration of events, the multiple platforms in Frankenstein MD surprisingly reinforce the primacy of Victoria's point of view. While Victoria and Iggy are ostensibly sharing scientific facts, discoveries already made, the fictional intrudes from the very first episode when Victoria styles herself MD, despite not having yet graduated. And the episodes also focus increasingly on Victoria's avant-garde approach to modern pseudo-scientific experiments and revivification. Unlike earlier Pemberley digital adaptations, Frankenstein MD is a limited social media presence, instead delivering most content via web videos and on Victoria's blog. Even in posts that feature the words of other characters, Victoria frames the entries through her perspective. Indeed, much of the dramatic tension in the series relies on viewers remaining focused on Victoria's perspective, while Waldman and Iggy undercut her off screen. Now, Iggy DeLacy's on-screen presence is limited to his participation in Victoria's videos, often as the subject of her demonstrations, as well as the 7 Ask Iggy vlogs that answer viewers' questions about real-world science. And you can see all of these here along the side on the playlist. If you scroll down, we have the Ask Iggy episodes. And then also, if you click here under Show More, you can see the Pemberley Digital, the PBS ancillary episodes about like the uses of E. coli in this one. Also their merchandise, as well as, the website, the Twitter account, the Facebook, the Tumblr, and the Instagram that goes along with the web series. And you can see that this is surprisingly a scale down from Pemberley Digital's previous adaptations. So let's talk about Ask Iggy for just a second here. Get the first one rolling. When the first video appears, it appears to comically highlight, in the first video of the web series, appears to comically highlight Iggy's secondary role to Victoria. As you remember, he facetiously claims that her web series title has been abbreviated to Frankenstein MD instead of featuring both of their names. The very format of his vlog, which you see here, presents him as a scientific expert qualified to answer any questions about current research. The series thus presents 2 models of work in the sciences. Iggy's model, associated with Waldman and a male scientific community of experts who operate within existing conventions and guidelines, and Victoria's model, which chafes against the interference of old men in retarding scientific progress. Victoria's belief that scientific caution is a form of veiled misogyny is not without merit, as her male peers and friends insist on calling attention to her gender as a factor in her decision-making. But the series ultimately reinforces their perspective. While her scientific discoveries are co-opted by Iggy and Waldman, perhaps offering a critique of the ways in which women's work in the sciences has historically been exploited, the series nevertheless concludes with Victoria's rejection of science. As the only female scientist represented in the series, her decision to leave the field voluntarily, in effect, cedes the field to her male peers. The web series is ostensibly Victoria's effort to popularize science by demonstrating key scientific concepts to her viewers, but her appropriation of lab resources and human subjects violate the laws which regulate scientific experiments. Victoria brings science to life with reckless and at times outright unethical experiments, such as shocking Iggy's heart, demonstrating electromagnetic induction on Iggy's brain, and studying the effects of sleep deprivation on herself and Iggy. So, as the third episode contrasts the university-sanctioned drug trial shown here, in which Victoria, Eli, and Roy are participating, Victoria's unofficial drug demonstration using paralytic and anesthetic agents on Eli and Rory. Once Victoria borrows and tests the drugs studied in the university drug trial, she deduces that the point of the study is to prove that already discredited natural remedies are ineffective, prompting Rory to deadpan with an eye roll. Yay, science. Unlike the university-sanctioned science, which is uniformly presented as ineffective or boring, but nonetheless uses human subjects and receives financial backing from corporations, Victoria's science is cutting edge to the point of concern, and only possible because she has successfully borrowed drugs, a genetically modified goat, and cow eyeballs, not to mention Waldman's lab and its resources. By questioning the ethics and effectiveness of science that has been approved by the various authorities, the series differentiates between scientific theory and practice, between academic reports that are purportedly Victoria's goal, and our vivid eyewitness perspective of the experiments in progress. I'm going to stop here and start the next video in just a moment.